Welcome, everyone. I'm Becky King from Wellesley Career Education.
And I'm Dana Keep.
And today we're happy to share with you some highlights from the book Switchers by Don Graham. And and we're excited to, we're not going to go through it chapter by chapter. It's too long and it would take too long. But just to give you the highlights of it. And the reason we chose this is we thought there are so many good career books out there. Some of you may know we've already highlighted Designing Your Life and Designing Your Work Life. This book came to our attention through a career advisors consortium we're part of, and the discussion last spring was about this book as a toolkit, helping people make a switch. And I thought, you know what, let's do this one, Dana, as a good sort of kickoff this fall, because it's handy to use it as a handbook because it has summaries at the end of every chapter and tips for making switches summarized neatly. And they also have, she also provides questionnaires and worksheets. And I find those to be useful rather than just speaking about something, is to let you dive into it, practically speaking. It seemed like a good time post-pandemic as we're coming out of the pandemic. I don't know if I'm allowed to say post-pandemic yet, but we are in a better place than we were. And go ahead, Dana. You go ahead and start off on this part.
Okay, with that, we'll kick it off here. The first question, I think it's important to do some internal work anytime you begin a job search, and that includes when you're thinking about making a minor or a major transition or switch. And so just starting with the headlines right now, many of you may have seen that they're talking about the Great Resignation. Over 4 million people left their jobs in the United States during the month of August. And you've also seen the headlines about the She Session, noting that what's happened during the pandemic has affected women more than it has affected men. So if you put those two things together, the Great Resignation and the She Session, you will find that a lot of people are thinking about changing jobs or getting back to work or switching industries or whatever it might be. I think this time during COVID has allowed a lot of people some space and time to really think more deeply about what they really want to do. Becky and I, in our advising conversations, are certainly seeing this among Wellesley alums. People might be thinking, wow, I've always wanted to work with children. Maybe I really need to do that now. Or, wow, I think it's time I go back to graduate school. I've been putting it off and putting it off. Now might be the moment. Or, you know, there's this issue I really want to work on. I want to work on helping alleviate poverty. And I just keep talking about it, but I don't take action. So I think I'm going to take action now. So those are the kinds of things that I think people have come to during this time when we've all had more time at home, more time to think. And the other additional factor is that the current remote work or hybrid possibilities are really changing the game and increasing options for people. While I don't think we're finished with the pandemic yet, as Becky said, we can't quite say post-pandemic, and we don't know quite how workplaces are going to shake out in terms of working from home, hybrid, or having to be in the office. I do think it's going to provide both challenges and opportunities for people who are thinking about making a career switch, and as they consider, you know, geography, commute type of work, and all sorts of things like that. So this is a time of particularly thoughtful reconsideration of careers, and a lot of people changing or looking for jobs.
Yeah, there are over 10 million job openings at the end of August in this country. So that's encouraging news. I should mention too that the author, Don Graham, is currently at Wharton in the Executive MBA Career Center, directing that. She's a career coach, but she has also been a recruiter, and she has a PhD in psychology. And interestingly, her dissertation was on extroverts and introverts and their approach to the job search. And there's some interesting nuggets in the book about introverts. Being introverted is not a flaw. So if any of you today are introverts, that's good news for you. And she has some good tips for you. She also came to this book because came to write this book because she was part of the 60,000 person layoff at Arthur Andersen back in 2002. And it took her by surprise and forced her to think about transitions and switching and whether to switch roles, whether to switch industries, and so forth. And so I think given all of this movement that Dana just referred to, oh, and also I wanted to point out, she mentions, think about it this way. The Bureau of Labor Statistics says that, you know, if you're going to have an average of 11 positions in your career, and you're going to have an average of 4.2 years in each job, and each job search might take you 6 months or a little bit longer. So over a lifetime, the average person is spending 5 years in some form of a job search. So approaching it with the best tools possible is important given the amount of time that you're going to be spending searching for a job. Now, she also points out that when you are laid off or thinking about re-entering or making a transition, and she refers a lot to psychology terms, as you might expect. She says our lizard brains, our mentality is just to go out to the nearest job board, Indeed, whatever it will be for you, and start applying like crazy. And the problem with that is that we know statistically how ineffective that is. And she said, even when people are faced with the facts of, look, you know, that's not an effective use of your time, people will still say, yes, but that's what I'm going to do right now. And she said, no, there's got to be a better way to think about this. And a lot of the book, and we'll talk about this too, focuses on networking as your best strategy, and that you don't get a job through applicant tracking system portals, recruiters, headhunters, whatever you want, you know, that's not the most effective way to go about it. So she talks about the switching process in terms of degrees of difficulty. So perhaps you are, what kind of a job switcher are you? And I mentioned there's a questionnaire as well of, are you ready for the job switch? But the easiest path here is the traditional, I'm going to find a job. I've been a career advisor. I'm going to find another career advising job. That's the easiest because it's a traditional candidate. You're not switching anything. Moderately challenging is to be single switching into a different industry. Even more challenging is to be a double switcher, where you are switching not only the industry, but the function of your job. And the most difficult of all, the most difficult of all, is the double switcher function in industry. The more challenging than the industry switch is the function switch. So it goes in order of, I'm not switching anything to I'm switching industries, but I'm still doing my job as a marketer. I'm in marketing, but I'm going to do it in a different industry. And more complicated than that is I'm going to become a data analyst instead of a marketer in a different industry. So that anyway, just thinking about it that way. Also, she mentions that when you're facing a 180 in this switch, it may not be possible to go from marketing person for a nonprofit to a totally different role in a totally different industry. You may need to have a stepping stone bridge job. In fact, you probably will. So that is something she devotes a whole chapter to.
Okay, and she also mentions that if you are returning to work after a gap, sometimes that can add a different layer of complexity, and not insurmountable at all, but just to be aware that if you've been, you know, on sabbatical or taking care of elderly parents or raising children or something like that, that may add a little bit of difficulty to your switch, but we can talk about that later. Okay, having read many books in this field, as Becky and I love to do, and love to share the insights with you, we are always looking for clever acronyms or wordplay or things like that that help people remember things. And I will explain Don Graham's Consider the 4 R's here, just in case this is of interest to anyone. And these are things that the 4 R's are things that can be a little bit part of the challenge of switching, but it's helpful to think of them in think of these 4 areas just because if you're encountering an obstacle, you might see that it fits in with one of them. So the first one is responsibility. You really are in charge and you have some control over your outcome. You don't have total control because there's good old luck, fate, and timing. And so you can't control everything, but you do need to take control and responsibility for the work that you're doing to make your switch happen. You need to be proactive and find your way around obstacles that will come up. And if you find that you're struggling with your switch, you may need to ask yourself, have I taken enough responsibility here? Are there other things I can handle so that I'm not just complaining about what's not happening outside my world? The second R is reality. We have to operate in the real world, not the world we wish it would be, not what should happen. She talks a bit about how things can be unfair. I mean, we all know that. People should get back to you once you have an interview, and they should let you know if you were going to move on or not. But I'm sure we've all had the experience of not hearing in a reasonable amount of time and wondering what in the heck went wrong there and why aren't they responding to me? So that's an example of what should happen, but maybe not going to happen. And, that is real life. I think also an element of reality is knowing what your true, what's truly important to you. What are your non-negotiables? What are you willing to bend on as you think about making a switch? In your reality, you may not be able to move cities. Your children may be involved in school, or you may have a partner who has a job that isn't flexible, or you may need to be near another family member or something like that. So that's a real world constraint in your switch. You can't do it. But you might be able to have flexibility in another way. Like you might not care if you change your title or don't even have a title in your first job of your switch. So thinking about yourself in the real world, really dealing with reality, involves accepting the fact that sometimes things are unfair and knowing yourself and knowing what your real constraints are. The third R is risk, because there are no guarantees. Again, luck, fate, and timing play a role, and you can't be sure that if you want to make this switch, it's 100% going to happen. So if now is not the time in your life to take a risk, then you may have to put off your switch for a few hours, but you need to be realistic about that. This may not be the moment. Maybe, again, you have a partner whose job is really unstable, so you don't want to risk making this switch. Or maybe your industry is undergoing a rapid transformation and you don't feel comfortable making a switch right now, the industry you want to go to. So you may have to think about a time frame, like I can try this for X amount of months, and then I will need to continue on if I can't find something by then. And finally, resilience. We've talked a lot about resilience during the pandemic. And it certainly takes resilience to get through a job search, any kind of job search, but particularly one where you're switching industries or functions or both. Everyone experiences rejection, disappointment, frustration, and unfairness. And so it's important to be able to accept it, see if there's a lesson in there, and then try to brush it off and move on. Becky and I like to think of ourselves as creative reframers. So if you're feeling very frustrated and feeling like resilience isn't your strong suit at the moment, we're here to help you reframe things more positively. So please reach out to us for that. But the responsibility, reality, risk, and resilience words can be helpful if you're feeling frustrated. You can ask yourself, is my issue coming up in these 4 words? And that might help you figure out what action you could take.
Good. Yeah, she even has a handy chart where she says, if you don't take responsibility to own this, then there's no action. If you don't have a reality check, you are directionless. And if you don't have the ability to take the risk, of course, you get no results, nothing ventured, nothing gained. And of course, without resilience, it's far too easy just to give up and say, yeah, I knew this was going to be too hard. I just can't do this right now. And as Dana mentioned, we are here for all of you when you feel that way, like you're just going to throw in the towel, or you can't see clearly what your attributes are, what your strengths are, how you're going to make this switch. That's why we're here. So I'm glad to have this chance to talk to you right now. One of the things that I think goes hand in hand with resilience is mindset. And we've talked in the past about Carol Dweck's research in growth mindset and the importance of having growth mindset in a job switch, obviously a career switch, is that you need to see what you haven't learned yet, what you need to develop a little further to get to point B. And rather than the fixed mindset of, I've never done this before, what was I thinking? There's no way that I can make this switch from marketing person to data analyst. I don't know what I was thinking. So the growth mindset is critical. Avoiding comparisons fall into the fixed mindset category. And also being very clear about your target. If you don't know where you're heading, no one can help you get there. She does not use the term prototyping, but we will use that term today because we think that it's important when you're thinking about how to get there, that you try things out. She does discuss ways that you can get some experience if you don't have it yet to make that switch. Targeted volunteering, maybe you have a self-designed internship project in mind or a returnship, which is a thing. If you're returning to the workforce, maybe there's a gig or a project that you might help out with, or you could offer your services short-term to prove yourself and add that to your repertoire. And there are obviously certifications and online courses. Again, you may know about all of these, but Coursera, edX, LinkedIn Learning, and most of these are free unless you need credits for something. So.
Okay, one thing that Becky and I hear a lot from Wellesley alums is, hey, I want to make a career change. I think I'll go back to graduate school, because a lot of Wellesley alums love school and love learning. And wouldn't it be fun to get a master's in X, Y, or Z? And it might well be, and it might be the right answer. There's no question about it. But we just wanted to reflect the author's question here that it may not be a panacea. You still have a job search to do when you finish your master's program. So it doesn't make the job search go away. It might make the search easier, or it might not. So a few things to consider. Is it really necessary, or is it just, would it be like nice to have? And you can find that out by asking people who are in your target field if they think it is really necessary. You also have to think about the very practical implications of, will I incur debt here? How much is this going to cost? What income loss will I experience? Can I do this part-time so that I don't lose income? All of those kinds of questions are obviously very individual and very important to consider, unless you just won the lottery. You want to make sure, if you are looking at grad school programs, that you talk to people who graduated from those programs and ask them about it and how they thought it helped or not. You may find a good opportunity to ask them, was there a practicum? Did you have a project work or internship that gave you real world experience in your target field while doing this grad program? Because if it's all academic, all classroom learning, that doesn't really help you with the sort of transferable skills that you might need to make the switch that you're hoping to make. So an advanced degree in some cases is 100% necessary. Obviously, if you want to become a nurse, you need a nursing degree. If you know, so it's possible that your switch may involve graduate school, and there's just no choice about that. But if it's a little murkier, just want to point out that you shouldn't assume it will solve everything, but do some research there and think about that.
All right. Also, she spends quite a bit of time in the book discussing your brand. Now, Dana and I are not comfortable with your personal brand. We don't love using that term, but it is a business school term, so it makes sense she's using it. And quite honestly, we do talk about the value of brands and the trust we have in certain brands, well-known consumer brands, I mean. So what we've chosen to reframe this and think in terms of, you're building trust, yes, and you're showing somebody who you are, what your value is. So we'll use the term brand today, but just know that we have hesitation about using that for people.
It's not our favorite.
Yeah. But she goes to great lengths to talk about this and the importance of that, and knowing what your value is, what sets you apart, what differentiates you, what is your unique selling point. If you don't know this, then you cannot successfully make this switch, because you have to be able to show your value to those dubious hiring managers who are loss averse. I mean, there's a long chapter in here about loss aversion, and that is, we don't want to make a mistake. It might hurt. So we, as job seekers and job changers and switchers, are also afraid, and we have all kinds of barriers. Like we'd rather go get a root canal than go to that networking event, for instance. But you have to get past your own loss aversion and realize that the person hiring also has loss aversion. And that is why they tend to go towards traditional candidates, and they don't want to put in the effort to think about someone who's coming from a different sector or a different function. And that's on you to think about what it is that separates you. And it might be that you are coming from a different background, and that's a plus. There's a whole map on page 97 of the book about who I am map. So you can think about the questions there, the roles you've had, the value you brought to the roles, the accomplishment, things like that will be helpful for you. Think about it this way. We all have different aspects, right, in who we are. Whether you're a daughter, a sister, a mother, a spouse, a professional, a lawyer, a doctor, all of the different aspects we have. But, and think about what aspect are you going to show? What aspect is it that you need to highlight to make the switch? All right, enough on that.
Okay, yep. Brand is a thing. You can call it different things, but it's something it's the internal work you have to do before you're really out there talking with people. So.
Oh, and I just want to add one more thing before I forget. So she suggests that maybe you run a SWOT analysis: strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. So about the target, right? So your target employer, industry, job function. What is it that they do well, that their strengths are in? What are their weaknesses? What are their opportunities in this industry? And what are their threats? And think about yourself in the same way. Well, I have these strengths that will match with the threats that they face, or I have these abilities that will match with what the problem, their pain point that they're dealing with.
Okay. So one of the things I really think is the essence of this book, and the essence of what is required if you're making a switch, is that you, as the job seeker, need to do a little more work, perhaps, than those who are just trying to move from an assistant director to a director, a student teacher to a teacher, a vice president to a president, or whatever it might be. If you're making a switch, you have to work a little bit harder to help anyone that you're speaking with. It could be the person in the elevator that you're having a casual conversation with. It could be a fellow alumna that you've reached out to and you're trying to learn more about her company, or it could be a hiring manager who's thinking of hiring you. In all of those conversations, you need to do more work to help the other person see why this switch will be both, a great switch, makes sense, and, fits with your life. So there's 3 areas that you can think about when you're thinking about doing this work. And then I'm going to give you a couple of really specific examples. So you have to be able to tell someone about your abilities, your transferable skills, and what you will bring. You have to be able to talk about why you will fit in this new culture, this new area, this new company or organization. And then finally, you have to communicate, why are you making the switch? Some people get all strategic about it and they say, well, what should I say about why I'm switching? And my answer is always, be absolutely genuine, because it does make sense to you. And the same people don't have the same reasons. Your reasons may be very different from someone else's, but they both may be very authentic reasons for making a switch. So think about abilities, fit, and the why, the motivation for why you're making this switch now. And here's a couple of examples. Let's say, for example, you've been a middle school math teacher and but you've always been fascinated with technology, and you've decided to make a switch into an ed tech role at a company. You might say something like, my experience in the classroom will help me understand how this technology will actually be used. The listening skills I've developed working with students and families will help me quickly assess the needs of all of my customers. I'm comfortable talking about educational goals, and I believe in the mission of your company to help teachers and students use tech tools along with in-person teaching practices to enhance learning. So in that short description, you've mentioned some skills that will transfer. You've mentioned your comfort in talking about educational goals, which will be part of the culture of that company. And you've mentioned why you want to make this change. I mean, perhaps the person would go on to say a little bit more about being fascinated with technology and wanting to really see how people use it. That was a brief description, but there could be more to say, but hopefully that gives you some idea. And because I think examples can be helpful, I'll mention one more. Let's say you're a Wellesley alum who's gone on to do consulting for a few years after school, but it feels too broad and too general for you. And along the way, you've been developing an interest in clean energy or helping the environment in some way, and you need to explain this to a future employer. You might say, after working in consulting for several years, I've developed strong teamwork and analytical skills. I love listening to a problem and strategizing with others to come up with creative solutions. The companies I'm most excited about helping in my consulting role are the ones who are trying to do well by doing good, specifically those who are involved in helping the planet. I want to contribute my skills and energy now to ESG investing. That's environmental, social, and governance investing. I think my broad consulting background will help me be part of creative solutions and the mission of supporting companies in the early stages that will have a positive impact on our planet is a huge motivator for me. I've also been volunteering with my town on our environment committee and learning more about the clean energy solutions that we can implement. So you can see with that example too, that you've talked about abilities, you've talked about fit, and you've talked about motivation. And those are the things that you need to communicate to somebody. And although connect the dots is becoming a very, very overused cliche, that is what comes to mind, is you're connecting the dots between your past and your future and filling in that section that someone else might not see. And someone might not see it for various reasons. They might not see it because they've never changed industries or roles, or they may not see it because they've never hired someone who's changed industry or roles, or they may not see it because they're really tired that day and just not really feeling like dealing with a challenge. So that's why you doing the work of putting that together for them will really help.
Also, she points out a quick tip when you're thinking about this, the what, the how, and the why. When you're writing your cover letter or in your interview or what have you, to avoid using the words change, transition, because that instills fear. This is a risk. I don't want to take, I'm risk averse. Okay. I'm loss and risk averse. So somebody changing, I don't think I can deal with that. So instead of that, which distances you from your hiring team, you want to say, I'm expanding my role from, and I'm taking the next step. So that's a much lower risk terminology. So I thought that was a helpful quick tip there. On the heels of those good examples, Dana. Well, you knew if you have seen any of our webinars in the past that we can never get through speaking with you without discussing networking. And there are 2 whole chapters in this book about networking because it is the core of her argument in terms of making the switch as the tool for you. So applicant tracking systems will weed you out. Hiring managers have biases. We all have innate biases. And so you have to overcome all of that. And so how do you do that? Well, you reach out to who you know, to your network. You may have been out of the workforce for a while and you feel like your networking contacts are cold. She has all kinds of tips of how to warm them up again. And we can talk about that today too. As I mentioned, she's an introvert. Her whole dissertation was on introversion, extroversion approach to the job search. She has a whole page on introversion is not a flaw. and tips for that. And basically the bottom line is you don't have to feel like you have to go out and find strangers to talk to. You can talk to people you already know, and through a conversation with them, if you are keen on using all the tips that we've talked about already and that she covers in terms of who you are, why you're making this transition, why you're making the switch, they will connect you with the people you don't know yet. And she gives an example for herself of somebody that was living in her building, and she was in the elevator one day and just saying, how's it going? And she said, well, I got laid off and now I have to find a whole new thing. And I'm thinking about switching to XYZ company. And he said, oh my gosh, my wife works there. So maybe you'd like to talk to her. So you never know, right? If you don't put it out there, but you do need to talk to the people you know and start making them, she calls, your ambassadors. I don't know if Dana and I would go as far as to say, set up a bunch of ambassadors for yourself. But the point there is you have to get them thinking about your needs and your switch needs and all the value that you bring for that to work best. And I think the important thing to remember is her TED Talk, in fact, is your next job is one conversation away. And so again, the key here is having those conversations. Conversations are just the opening. They're not the outcome. So for anyone who's feeling shy or introverted, again, it isn't, you don't have to, go far afield to find some helpful support from your network. So we're wrapping up at this point, and we're going to stop recording in a moment. But just remember, it takes stamina. You've got to stay motivated, stay positive. There's always rejection. There's always going to be unfairness, frustration, disappointment. So that's why you don't do this alone. You enlist the help of friends, supporters, as well as the career education, and all of us. So I also wanted to, in closing, another point she makes is just how hard it is to relinquish your identity, to relinquish the role you have been in, to switch into something different. We like we grow comfortable in those identities. So to say, I'm a career advisor, if I stop saying that, that's scary to me. Now I'm switching into, I'm a professor, I'm a teacher, I'm a something else. I get scared about that. So she says, well, think about it this way. It is hard to relinquish that identity, but maybe you need to reframe it and think about loss as a powerful motivator. Loss is a more powerful motivator than gain. So maybe reframe it. What do I lose if I don't make this change? We tend to focus on the positive, and I'm all for that. But sometimes it's important to ask yourself, what am I losing if I don't make this change?
That's important. Okay, so I'd love to just add one more thought about networking, and then I will summarize a little bit. And at that point, we will turn off the recording and welcome anyone's questions or conversations. So the one point that I wanted to add is, normally we think about reaching out to people to talk about their company, their role, their function, the things that we want to learn about, or the area where we are heading. But one other thing that can be helpful is actually reaching out to others who have made switches, even if the industries aren't the same. Just hearing their stories might be, number one, inspiring, and number two, instructive. They could possibly tell you about something they did to make a switch that could actually help in your switch, even if you're not doing the exact same switch. So that is a point to remember. And that may be a casual conversation you have at a block party in your neighborhood or something, and say, hey, I heard you just recently switched from working in finance to working for a nonprofit. How did you do that? That's a great conversation starter. People love to tell their story, and that could be helpful to you too. Okay, so to summarize, I would love to just capture the essence of what I think is the message of switchers. I think the first thing to remember is that the fact that you're switching might actually be your advantage. When people put teams together, they do not want 10 people with the exact same traditional background. So you cannot be both a person with a traditional background and one who's switching from a different industry or function. But you might bring something unique if you are a switcher. So I think it really helps to think of it as a possible advantage, because whether or not it actually would be in that particular situation, I mean, there's no point. It certainly doesn't help you to think of it as a negative. So try to think of it as something you have to bring, which others may not have, and that you could contribute to a team in that way. And sure, there'll be other people on the team who come from, you know, the role prior that was the obvious role, but that's not going to be you. The second thing is that you do have to do the extra work for people. You have to connect those dots. There I go. You have to learn to speak their language. You have to use the lingo and the jargon of their daily life so that they can understand what you're saying. And you have to make it clear to them why this switch is logical and compelling. And then finally, as Becky said, you know, networking is important in any job search. It's extra important when you're switching, because the people you talk to will help make your case for a switch. And I also did like Don Graham's TED Talk title is One Conversation Away. So when you think about networking, maybe break it down to one conversation away, and that will help give you inspiration for reaching out to Wellesley alums.